Schiff, Democrat from California, a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
Since Ruth just brought it up, let me play specifically what Jay Carney had to say.
But the only edits made by anyone here at the White House were stylistic and non-substantive. They corrected the description of the building or the facility in Benghazi from consulate to diplomatic facility.
But we know, Congressman, at a Saturday morning meeting at the White House, the talking points were further watered down. So with someone either at the State Department or the White House trying to cover something up, is there some accountability needed here?
Well, you know, I think the most significant error in the talking points, and this has been a bit lost in this discussion, is the argument that this began as a spontaneous protest. And that actually stayed in the talking points from the very beginning to the very end. And that was the most fundamental error in these talking points. But that was in the talking points because the intelligence community got that wrong. They were dead wrong on that, and I think they should be held accountable for that. But there's no evidence that there was any malicious purpose in getting that wrong. They simply had different strands of intelligence, and their conclusion was, in sum, that they thought it began as a protest. The other changes were significant, but I think, like Ruth pointed out, this was largely between State Department and CIA, each trying to make each other look better or less worse. But I don't see any great evidence of a cover-up here, and the most significant mistake, again, was the spontaneous protest element, and on that the intelligence community simply had it wrong. But in the interest of either full disclosure or at least the appearance of full disclosure, do you think it was a mistake not to interview Hillary Clinton? You know, I think that Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullen concluded that the line of authority stopped before it got to her, but ultimately she did accept responsibility, and she not only accepted responsibility, she testified before the committee. It's hard for me to understand what the congressional committees that already had the chance to hear from her and question her about anything in the Accountability Review report or anything about her interactions, why they feel that they did an inadequate job, why the committees couldn't get information that they thought the ARB should have gotten. So we heard from the Secretary, and I'm not sure why that's not enough, except for the fact she's very popular, she may run for president, and obviously there's a political interest in trying to tarnish her, which the GOP seems to be making the most of. And what about the whole issue of security and the many conversations that apparently were had, the communication that was given? They wanted more security. We know that this was a highly volatile area. We know that this was a dangerous posting. What is Congress going to do to address that issue? Well, that's a great question, and I think that really is, you know, the heart of what we should be focusing on, and that is there were serious mistakes made by the State Department in protecting these facilities. Those mistakes have been, you know, elaborately and thoroughly reviewed by the ARB. They made 29 recommendations about what ought to be done. Congress should be looking into how are those recommendations being implemented. The State Department says they're doing it, but we should be following up to make sure that they are doing it. These are, I think, all appropriate things for Congress to be doing, and I would add this. I would love to see a far bigger focus on tracking down, hunting down these people responsible, and to listen to the congressional committees on this. You would think that there was no interest in bringing those responsible to justice because there's so little discussion and oversight of that investigation. And those two things, the hunt for the killers and the review of, you know, what went wrong in terms of our security and what needs to change, that really ought to be where we place our focus instead of on this partisan exercise that we continue seeing. Well, something else the administration is going to have to deal with, and the president may have to answer questions in the next hour, is the IRS admitting it targeted Tea Party groups for additional scrutiny. Let me hear what some of your colleagues had to say over the weekend.
I don't care if you're a conservative, a liberal, a Democrat, or a Republican. This should send a chill up your spine.
It is absolutely chilling that the IRS was singling out conservative groups for extra review. And I think that it's very disappointing that the president hasn't personally condemned this and spoken out.
It's clear that Democrats and the president have had less to say and less criticism of this than the Republicans, but do the Republicans have a point?
They absolutely have a point. I mean, if the IRS was targeting conservative groups for selective enforcement, that ought to be disturbing to all Democrats and Republicans alike.
So do heads need to roll? Does somebody need to get fired over this? What needs to happen? There'll be congressional hearings for sure.
If the IRS was selectively enforcing the law, then yeah, absolutely heads need to roll. I will say this, Chris, that I wish there was more GOP interest when I raised the same issue during the Bush administration when it audited a progressive church in my district in what looked like a very selective way. I found only one Republican, Walter Jones, that would join me in calling for an investigation of the IRS in the Bush administration. But I'm glad that the GOP now has found interest in this issue, and it ought to be a bipartisan concern. The IRS absolutely should not be picking winners and losers or picking political ideologies. It ought to neutrally enforce its regulations regardless of the political point of view of an organization.
But if it happened, Congressman, when you made a complaint that a church in your district was being targeted, and it's happening now, is this a problem in the IRS that's been going on for a while, this targeting?
You know, it may very well be, and you know, the one thing I would love to see is a broader investigation of the IRS to see not only whether this has been going on during the current administration, but whether it was going on during the prior administration too. I would point to a systemic problem within the IRS that transcends administrations, and it's very possible that's exactly the case.
Congressman Adam Schiff, it is always good to have you on the program, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Let me bring